And at long last, we are ready for episode 4 of my Rings of Power rewrite. This episode is going to be focusing primarily on those Númenóreans that we saw in episode 1, so we'll finally be able to learn what they're doing and what role they have to play in this larger narrative. Will it be better than what the show did with its Númenóreans? I suppose we'll have to find that out. Our episode opens with a short montage of the Harfoot stores in Glorfindel heading north on the Anduin. We see a mixture of walking, eating, and rowing up the river as the landscape gradually changes from late summer to fall. If you want, we can even have some singing like what was in the show, but a decent amount of time should be shown to have passed considering just how many people there are, the general lack of urgency, the fact that they're all moving uphill, and by the passing of the seasons. We see Marigold and Glorfindel talking throughout the montage, and gradually Marigold's family begins to warm to him. Glorfindel rather quickly learns to navigate through Harfoot family politics, though he finds himself annoyed that he seems to be a pawn in the larger game that they're playing. He does, however, remark to himself that he is lucky that the most prestigious family is the one guiding him. Furthermore, we see him asking for greater amounts of haste, which eventually the Harfoots acquiesce to, and we see that within a day of picking up their pace, they make it to the Falls of Raros. At first, the Harfoots want to go around, but Glorfindel says that this is likely a bad idea. The stores then note that there's a way you can get up the falls on either side of the river, and Glorfindel casts his vote on this idea. The scene then ends when we see Hamul and his followers watching the Harfoots, with a large group of wargs following behind. We then cut to Valandil and Silmo, the Númenórean men we met in episode 1, returning to their ship after having docked and spoken with the leader of a Númenórean colony in Middle-earth. They are both clearly happy with the way things have been kept up in the city, and the audience can see that the city looks rather impressive, especially in comparison to the small town and tower we saw in Arendir's plot. "That was well done," says Valandil as they board the ship. "I'd say your sister would be proud were it not for her impossible expectations." Isilmo smiles. "Queenship over Númenor is a difficult task, especially without a husband. I would say you should be thankful for her expectations, as they're the reason you're on this expedition." Valandil laughs. "True. Well, I suppose that does invalidate my complaints, even if it does make the journey last longer." After they finish boarding, they find Minister, the son of Isilmo, waiting to hand over command. "The ship has been prepared to set sail," he says formally and in an overly stiff manner. "Well done, lad," Valandil says as he claps his hand on his shoulder. "But loosen up. People are just as likely to take offense if you're overly stiff as if you're overly relaxed. Depending on who is presented to you, they might perceive you as being angry or harsh with them." Minister nods and relaxes his shoulder. "In either case, we're ready to set sail." "Good," Isilmo says. "Captain, release anchor and let us move on to the next colony." "Yes, sir," the captain says. "Actually," Minister says as he grabs hold of his father's arm, "I was wondering if now would be a good time to return to Númenor. Is that so? I thought you would have shown excitement for this next phase of the journey." "It is, after all. Finally your turn to cast judgments and to make treaties with the peoples of Middle-earth. I believe I've gained enough of an understanding from watching the two of you." Isilmo raises an eyebrow at this. "In either case, I'm afraid that's not an option. The Queen wants to make contact with each of the colonies, as well as each trade partner. Númenórean presence has not been felt on Middle-earth for far too long. We must remind the people that we are still at large, that we are still quite powerful. I'm sure Aunt Telperion will understand. After all, you yourself noted that if we were gone for too long from her side, then plots may very well begin to form." "That's Tar Telperion to you, Minister. And while we have to be cautious about being errant for too long, there are also dangers for returning too quickly, especially without completing all of our work." Minister's back straightens at the rebuke, light though it was. "Father, you know I only have the best interest of Númenor in our house in mind." "I never doubted it," Isilmo says. "But part of your training is knowing when to accept the wisdom of others and when to exercise it yourself. You will likely be king one day if my sister remains stubborn in refusing to marry. But for now, you must accept my and your uncle's decisions in these matters." Minister bows his head slightly as Isilmo walks away before looking out to the west towards the setting sun. We then see the Southlanders and elves preparing for a siege. Arendir specifically notes how they should be as quick as possible, for we do not know if he will hold true to his promise of 14 days, with the other elves agreeing, knowing that it wasn't even truly a promise in the first place. "My Lord Arendir," Lord Gath says, "there's something I must speak with you about. By all means, say your piece." if I could, I would have it be in private. From my own soldiers, even? I am afraid so, my lord, meaning no offense to the integrity of your fellows. None has been received, my lord, one of the scouts says. Indeed, I and my group were just about to set out on our next scouting mission. Indeed, Arendir says. In fact, pay special attention to the off-road areas. It may be that the orcs have planned some ambushes for our parties. Arendir and Gath retreat to an inner chamber within the citadel, and it's clear that Gath is not fully recovered from his injury and from the journey. Will you be all right, my lord? Oh, I'll be fine, but I likely won't be able to participate in the battle should it come before the allotted time. I'm sure that you will provide much value, commanding men from within the walls. I thank you, my friend, but in any case, I have had a rather disturbing realization which I simply had to share privately for reasons I hope will become clear. Has it occurred to you how odd it is that this fortress, after having been abandoned for decades, if not hundreds of years, would be demanded by the orcs no more than a month after we have occupied it? The timing did seem odd, I admit, but given the ferocity of the orcs in their more recent battles with us, I had assumed it was due to their discovering we had occupied it. The orcs have been particularly keen on seeing your people dead, and they consider this to be the easiest and fastest way to accomplish this. Indeed, but did you not hear what the elf said? Adar, I think he called himself. Did you not hear what he offered? He asked us not to turn in ourselves, but merely to abandon this fortress. He even offered us liberty to settle elsewhere if we leave. A lie, no doubt. Perhaps, but what caught my attention the most was his request that we leave behind any devices which we have found. What do you suppose that could mean? Arendir sits back in his seat, his face unreadable. Go on. I think some of our men have discovered a weapon or mechanism in this fortress and have delivered this information to the orcs. That is why they came to this fortress so quickly without us detecting any of their scouts or raiding parties even being this far north. We have a spy in our midst. Arendir turns away from Gath's eyes as he processes this information before nodding as everything begins to fall into place. That would make the most sense of this situation, and even if it is not quite true, we have good reason to suspect many of our men. Do you have any ideas of who the spy could be? It would surely be someone who found whatever device they're looking for. Arendir nods. Very well. In any case, I'm not certain we will be able to discover the traitor before the siege begins. Let's focus on preparations for now. A worthy decision, my lord. We then return to the Númenóreans. Isilmo is judging a case between two craftsmen over whether a given sword was stolen from a blacksmith. Valandil and Minister watch from the side, with Valandil telling him to pay attention to the arguments that they're using. Specifically, he notes that the accuser believes that, since the Númenóreans are not a constant presence in their cities, they're ignorant of what is actually going on. The case is unexpectedly decided in favor of the defendant. The next case comes between a merchant and a farmer. My lords, the merchant says, I am the head of the Yunmal family. No doubt you have heard of us. I have, Isilmo says. What complaint would you like to bring? I'm afraid that I have a dispute concerning the land owed to me by this young man. Isilmo looks at the two men and then to his son and says, I'm afraid I'm not well versed in your laws of land rights. Surely a Númenórean lord such as yourself is learned enough to judge justly in any situation. Isilmo smiles. Indeed. Very well, if you will hear a judgment, then I would like my son to be the arbiter, for he has long studied matters such as this. The merchant's smiling facade slips for a moment, but he bows nonetheless, and Minister comes to the judgment seat, disguising his surprise. He hears the case, and specifically notices that the merchant is making a rather ostentatious showing of his knowledge of the legal technicalities of the situation, which, for the purpose of the actual production, need not be well thought out, at least not in terms of in-depth, real legal parallels or anything along those lines. Ultimately, when the farmer is finally allowed to speak, he merely states that the lands which are under dispute have been his and his family's for generations, and that at no point in their history had they ever agreed to give this merchant his land. You have been failing in upholding your contracts for 2 years, the merchant says. Which contracts are those? Minister asks. May I see them? The merchant pauses, as if he were not expecting such a request, but manages to produce the contracts rather quickly. Minister, likewise, quickly reads through them. There's nothing in these contracts which speaks about turning over land. But he promised to provide wool for the last 4 years, and has largely ignored his end of the deal, though I have remained faithful in providing the money. Turning to the farmer, Minister says, Is this true? My wool sheep were stolen, my lord. I can't provide the wool, and he pulls out another contract. I asked for a new deal so that he would stop sending me the money, but he refused. Your contract does not follow legal procedure. Besides, the custom of this land is that those who refuse the fulfillment of a deal pay an equal value. My friend here has just admitted that he has not the money to return, nor the wool for the fulfillment of the contract. There is, however, something he owns which is of equal value. I'll admit it's been an especially hard set of years, and I'm usually not so poor as many others, I know, so we thought we could fulfill our end of the deal, but my family and friends need that land just as much as previous years. I'll admit I'm not good with the signatures, my lord, but I promise to repay him anything he's owed when I have the means. And when will that be, the merchant says. Shall it be 20 years when I get my returns? What need have you or your family for this payment? Minister asks. The merchant looks at Minister as if he did not understand the question. What do you mean, my lord? Are you likely to starve if this man does not repay you? No, but I don't see why that should matter, given... And you, young man, why have you not returned the money you were given? Well, he didn't give me much money, my lord. He then looks at the merchant and says, in fact, my lord, the merchant says, this public courtroom is clearly too rife with interruptions. Perhaps we could deal with this more... privately. He subtly reveals a few pieces of gold in his hand, and the farmer, seeing this, has fear in his eyes, as if he's been in this sort of situation before. Minister's eyes narrow. You plan on bribing me, expecting the rest of the room to go into an uproar. But to his surprise, there are only a few murmurs that pass throughout the room, and everyone remains fairly uninterested in the action. Seeing this, Minister shakes his head. Enough of this. I will pay whatever is missing in the man's settlement if you will agree to pester him no longer. But, my lord, no. I will not tolerate your bending of the law to contravene justice. You will accept my settlement, or you will get nothing. The merchant's face finally darkens as his facade slips, and he pauses to glare at Minister. As my lord wishes. We then cut to them outside, with Valandil congratulating Minister on his first successful judgment. Isilmo makes no comment, but he's clearly pleased as well. Minister realizes quickly that the city is not what they've come to expect from a Númenórean port, commenting that it isn't much more than a town with a somewhat larger marketplace. Isilmo then explains the predicament of men in Middle-earth, how they are not as well off as the Númenóreans. We see the people make way for them as they pass, and they continue to walk through the market. But as they go, we see a mysterious figure, or group of mysterious figures following them. They approach a lookout over the coast, and Minister contemplates how well the elves lived compared to these men, and he asks if there's anything they could do to help them. Valandil says it's possible, and that this is one of the purposes of these agreements. Isilmo is less optimistic, saying that they can do much to support these men, but they cannot force them to change their ways, some of which are likely keeping them down. Minister begins to have a sort of sea longing and asks once more that they return to Númenor. But this is shot down by Isilmo once more for the same reason as before. It is after this that they descend from the lookout and they are attacked soon after. The attackers are clearly attempting to kill Minister in particular, but they are repulsed, though one of them is captured and questioned. Who are you? Valandil demands, twisting the man's arm. What is your purpose in attacking my nephew? Why should I tell you? He cries out in pain. Okay, fine. We were hired to kill the young Númenórean after he ruined our clients' livelihoods. What? Minister says. Indeed, Valandil says. Abrazan, take this man to the master of the city and explain the situation. Furthermore, let him know that the Yunmal family may have much to answer for. The Númenórean guardsman does as requested. Minister, however, still standing aghast while he watches the man move away, says, I thought I acted according to justice. I thought the case was clear. You did. And it was, Valandil says. Then why would they try to kill me? Because justice does not always favor all men, especially those who desire their own advancement. You do well to give others what is their due, but this results in punishing the evildoer as much as rewarding the lawful. But when you do so, do not expect a man who is willing to rob a widow of her wealth to congratulate you when you force him to give it back. Minister nods, but is still quite shaken by the encounter. As encouragement, therefore, Valandil lays something in his hand and begins to walk away. What's this? Minister asks. A gift. The farmer gave it to me, but I have a feeling it was intended for you. Minister opens his hand to see an amulet with a small ruby set as the gem. We then go to Galadriel, Celeborn, and Celebrian, with the three of them discussing Elendil and what his motives could be. Galadriel is furious that the so-called envoy of Valinor so quickly abandoned Lindon with the excuse of haste, only to tarry in her own lands. It seems that his haste lasted no more than a single journey. So much for the integrity of the messengers of Valinor. My love, Celeborn says, please do not slander the West again. I slander nothing. I merely state what I see with my own eyes. But mother, Celebrian says, do you know whether he is truly failing to fulfill his mission? Could it not be that he arrived at Eregion and found this land to be the most fitting for him to stay for the completion of his task? Is this not why Lord Elrond has come here with you? We see a flicker of a smile cross her face at the recollection of Elrond, though neither of her parents seemed to notice it. He stated to the High King that his message must be delivered to the realms of the elves. Well, what other realms ought he go to? We do have further brethren along the coast, and some just to the east of the Misty Mountains, Celeborn says. It is true that if he ought to be delivering his message to the elven realms, then there is some neglect on his part. Perhaps he was merely in such haste to save the decay of the world that when he was presented with the smiths of such quality as Celebrimbor, he had no choice but to remain here. He is apparently in such haste as to exchange only a few words with the High King, and to neglect his counsel as well as ours, to come to our realm and turn our guild of smiths to his side in our absence. Do you not see why I am skeptical of his motivations? I honestly do not, Celebrian says with growing frustration. I think your skepticism is unfair. A change takes place in Galadriel's face, looking at her daughter with a new realization. Celebrian, why are you so ardent in your desire to defend him? Celebrian opens her mouth as if to speak, but then quickly shuts it and walks away. Celeborn likewise gains an understanding of what's going on and smiles for a moment before turning to his wife and saying, regardless of our daughter's motives, her reasoning is likely not too far off from the truth. Galadriel shakes her head. No, it is wrong. Celeborn raises an eyebrow. What makes you so certain? My dear, don't you see the obvious? Celebrimbor and the other master smiths have been in Moria for the past 2 years procuring mithril and creating that door, which means this Elendil already knew about them before coming to Eregion and made sure he was long established by the time they returned. This was a plan of his, and we need to find out what it was he was planning. Celeborn's eyes widen for a moment as he realizes she's right. He turns to look out from the balcony on which they stand over the rest of their kingdom, with a particular eye pointed towards the Gwathi Myrdain. Very well, let's find out what he's up to. We find Glorfindel assisting the Harfoots up the falls of Rauros. He is first assisting Marigold and her family up the western side of the falls, but is disturbed when he hears a yelp echo in the east. He turns his head to try and locate it. What is it? Marigold asks. I suppose you didn't hear that? No? Wait. Are you making fun of my hearing too? I get it. You've got better eyes and ears and noses. Well, only one nose, but still, you don't need to rub it in. She has a smile on her face when she says this. Glorfindel smiles as well, having grown accustomed to her sense of humor, but a frown overtakes him shortly after. Marigold, I'm afraid this is not the time for jokes. There is likely danger about. Surprisingly, Marigold actually does become serious. But that shouldn't be possible. There's no way the orcs have already made it all the way up here. They don't travel this far north, and there are too many Ents and men. Glorfindel contemplates all the tarrying they've done in the past few months and says, I'm not so sure about that. He then looks back to the place where he heard the yelp and says, and besides, I don't believe it is orcs we are dealing with. Well, if there are bad guys around, then we can't just leave half the Harfoots at the top or the bottom. We definitely can't send them through the forest, so can we deal with it later? Glorfindel sighs with resignation. I suppose we have to. After Marigold and Amber are safely to the top, Glorfindel once more goes down to assist the rest of the Harfoots up the fall. Towards the bottom, he meets a young couple who at first are rather courteous and gracious for all the assistance he has provided the halflings. In reply to which, Glorfindel says that he is not being wholly unselfish, for the quicker they meet with the stores, the sooner he can continue with his task. They continue with the conversation. It becomes clear that they, just like the rest of the Harfoots, merely view him as a pawn in their house politics game. They begin attempting to lure Glorfindel away from Marigold and her family and towards their own house, as if he were just a prize with which they could brag to the others. It is at this point that he realizes where his staying with these people will end, in violence amongst themselves, and in completely neglecting directions for him. Therefore, Glorfindel leaves them and goes back to Marigold to tell her that he will be leaving, for he can no longer tolerate this sort of thing. However, just after climbing to the top of the falls, he hears about several Harfoot families who have climbed to the eastern side and have disappeared. Suspicious, especially in conjunction with the noise from earlier, he goes across the water and spots warg tracks. He pursues them to find a small pack of about 5 wargs, having surrounded and killed several members of a Harfoot family alongside a group of stores, who are also mostly dead. He saves the halflings by killing all but 1 warg. He sends them back to the others, and after they are out of earshot, he takes the 1 captive warg and tells him to return to his master and inform him that these people are under the protection of Valinor. The warg runs, and Glorfindel sneakily pursues after him. Our next scene has Minister looking at the token given to him by Valandil. It is a simple amulet, but he knows it must have been a truly prized possession to such a poor man. He looks to the east as a vision of a large black cloud stretching forth from the mountains comes to him. The cloud continues to expand and comes to swallow the Númenóreans, and we see that he has some sort of realization as he looks about the lands of Middle-earth that they are approaching. He once more speaks to Valandil and Minister, saying that he now truly realizes the darkness of their present situation in Middle-earth. Says, "Perhaps the people of Middle-earth really do need us, even more than the people of Númenor." They are sailing up through the Anduin from the sea to reach Pelargir, but as they do so, they pass a long series of abandoned towns and cities, and they begin to wonder what's going on. Once they reach Pelargir, they find it bursting with refugees and people in the streets. They confront the Númenórean magistrates to ask what is going on, and he informs them of recent events, and specifically that the rest of the people in this part of the world have fled north to Emin Arnin, and the fortress is about to be besieged. The Númenóreans then depart, going further up the Anduin. In a short scene, we see that the halflings who were rescued by Glorfindel quickly sailing across the river to get to the western side of the falls, and informing everyone else to do so. Marigold, however, looks to the east with suspicion. And for our final scene of the episode, we cut back to Arondir, who is staring out towards the south of the fortress. We see that everyone has been recalled into the fortress, including the farmers. The men are asleep in beds scattered throughout the towers and on the walls in the late summer night, while the elves keep vigil. We see several elvish scouts returning to the fortress, and their leader quickly goes to Arondir. "They are coming," he says. Arondir nods. He goes to wake Gath, but finds that he is already awake and is speaking with Bronwyn. The two of them seem to be rather enjoying each other's company, talking about a variety of things, whether it be medicine or politics, or even the differences of their own people. And Arondir smiles, seeing the two of them together, before then remembering his task and frowning. He goes to them and says, "We must be ready. The orcs will be here before dawn. Bronwyn and Gath, rise and prepare for the battle."